Racism has been a constant issue in society, yet it still manages to shock and disgust us when it happens in everyday moments. In this video, we dive into an incident that takes place on a flight, a moment that starts off as a normal journey but quickly escalates into something far more intense and revealing. A black man, just minding his own business, becomes the target of a racist white woman's vile accusations and humiliation. But what happens next is something no one could have expected. As the plane soared through the sky, the tension on board was palpable. A well-dressed black man, quietly reading his book, was unaware that his peaceful flight would soon take a dark turn. Across the aisle sat a white woman, visibly irritated, her eyes locked onto him as if he were some kind of threat. She began muttering to herself, but soon, the words spilled out loud, accusations of him being a criminal, a terrorist, simply because of his skin color. It started with a whisper, but it didn't escalate. The woman's voice grew louder, drawing the attention of the other passengers. Whispers filled the cabin, but the man sat still, trying to stay composed. He could feel the eyes of others on him, some sympathetic, others judgmental. The flight attendants tried to step in, asking the woman to calm down, but she refused to back off. "This man is a threat," she yelled, pointing at him with shaking hands. The situation was spiraling, and the entire plane seemed to be on edge, caught between the woman. The man stood up, attempting to defuse the situation with a calm voice. "Ma'am, I'm just here to get to my destination. I'm not a threat to anyone." But the woman was relentless, continuing her rant. "You don't belong here," she snapped. "We need to stop this flight right now." Her words cut through the air like a blade, and for a moment, everyone was frozen, unsure of how to react. The tension in the cabin was suffocating, as if the very air was thick with the weight of her racism. No one knew. Finally, the captain was alerted, and an announcement was made to calm the passengers. But the woman wasn't done yet. She demanded that the man be removed from the flight immediately, despite there being no valid reason for such an accusation. It was at this moment that the man's demeanor began to shift. He wasn't going to let her win. He walked down the aisle, his steps confident, as if he was walking towards something far more important than just an altercation. The woman's eyes followed him. The man approached the front of the plane, where the flight attendants were. The woman continued to shout, but now, the entire plane was watching her, their eyes full of judgment. It was clear that the passengers were starting to see the truth of the situation. They could hear the man's calm voice, speaking to the attendants, explaining the situation in detail. And that's when the real twist of the story was revealed. The man wasn't just any passenger. He wasn't a criminal. He was something far. The man approached the front of the plane, where the flight attendants were. The woman continued to shout, but now, the entire plane was watching her, their eyes full of judgment. It was clear that the passengers were starting to see the truth of the situation. They could hear the man's calm voice, speaking to the attendants, explaining the situation in detail. And that's when the real twist of the story was revealed. The man wasn't just any passenger. He wasn't a criminal. He was something far. The woman's face flushed red with embarrassment, realizing the gravity of her mistake. The passengers, who had initially been divided, were now united in their disbelief. Some exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others whispered amongst themselves. The judge's calm but unwavering presence had shifted the atmosphere. What had begun as a confrontation based on nothing but hatred and ignorance was now revealing something much deeper: how dangerous stereotypes and prejudices can cloud our judgment. The flight crew, now fully aware of who the man was, began to offer their apologies. But he waved them off, more focused on the woman's reaction than anything else. The judge wasn't here to make her feel guilty. He wasn't here for vengeance. He simply wanted to finish his flight in peace. Yet, as he returned to his seat, the entire plane seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The woman, still in shock, stared at him in stunned silence, her earlier venom now replaced. As the plane continued its journey, the atmosphere grew tense once more, though not because of the judge. It was the woman who now seemed out of place, awkwardly sitting in her seat, avoiding the eyes of others. The man, on the other hand, appeared entirely unbothered. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos that had just unfolded. But what was even more shocking than the woman's racist outburst was the subtle shift in power dynamics. For the first time, it seemed like the man was in. Midway through the flight, the woman's entire world had seemingly crumbled. She had just humiliated herself in front of everyone, exposing the ugly side of her character. And now, there was no escaping the reality of what she had done. The passengers, who had once been passive observers, were no longer just bystanders. Their eyes told a story of judgment, of silent support for the judge, who had not only defended his dignity but also stood up against injustice. No one could ignore the lessons in. As the flight began its descent, the woman, now quiet and subdued, approached the judge. Her voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes downcast. I'm sorry, she whispered, though her apology felt hollow, not because of the words, but because of the deep shame she now carried. The judge, without a word, simply nodded. There was no need for further conversation. He had already won the battle, not with anger or confrontation, but with the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you truly are. As the plane touched down, the woman remained quiet, her body language saying more than any apology ever could. The passengers began to exit, and the judge was one of the last to leave. His calm and composed demeanor had stayed with him throughout the entire ordeal. Despite the intensity of the confrontation, he showed no signs of anger or frustration. The incident had unfolded, and now, it was over. But its impact was far from finished. It had left a deep imprint on everyone who had witnessed it. Outside the plane, the woman was still processing what had happened. As she stood in the terminal, she glanced around nervously, unsure of how others saw her now. Her arrogance and hateful assumptions had been shattered in an instant, leaving her with nothing but regret. She didn't expect forgiveness, nor did she expect the judge to approach her again. But she couldn't shake the weight of the moment, a reminder of how her prejudice had once defined her, and how, in a single moment, it had cost her. The judge, however, had already moved on. For him, the situation was simply another example of the deep-rooted racism that still plagued society. But unlike the woman, he refused to let it define him. He understood that some people would never change, but that didn't mean he had to carry their hatred with him. He'd been humiliated too, just in a different way, by a system that too often failed to recognize his worth. But today, he had reclaimed his power in the most subtle yet profound way possible. Later that day, as the judge sat in his office, reviewing cases and making decisions, the incident on the plane felt like a distant memory. But there was one part of it that stayed with him, the realization that he had, in a sense, fought not just for himself, but for everyone who had been wrongly accused, wrongly judged. The woman's ignorance had exposed her, but in doing so, it had also highlighted a larger truth: prejudices may still run deep, but they don't have to control the narrative. As the story of what happened on that plane began to circulate, many were quick to praise the judge's restraint and dignity. News outlets covered the incident, and while some focused on the shocking nature of the confrontation, others took a deeper look at the lasting effects of racism. The man, now recognized as a public figure for the courage he showed, remained humble, quietly accepting the attention. His message was simple: true strength wasn't about confrontation, it was about maintaining The judge's story spread quickly, and what had started as an isolated incident on a plane had become a larger conversation about racism, power, and human dignity. Across social media, people began to share their own experiences, some echoing the judge's story, while others highlighted similar situations of racial profiling in their everyday lives. The judge, however, remained focused on what mattered most to him: creating lasting change through education, understanding, and a refusal to be silent. Meanwhile, the woman who had instigated the confrontation began to feel the weight of public scrutiny. Her identity was revealed, and soon, she found herself under a microscope. News stories painted her as a symbol of racial hatred, and she was bombarded with messages, some condemning her actions, others calling for her to be held accountable. She quickly realized that her outburst had not only humiliated the man but had also cost her the respect of the people around her. As the pressure mounted, the woman attempted to salvage what was left of her reputation. She issued a public apology, but it came too late. The damage had already been done. Her attempt at reconciliation was seen as insincere by many, and the judge remained unmoved by her words. For him, the apology didn't matter. What mattered was the impact of her actions, how they had almost derailed the peaceful flight of everyone on board, and how, in one moment, she had exposed the depth of her prejudice. The media, on the other hand, began to focus on the broader issue of racial profiling, drawing attention to how commonplace these experiences were for people of color. The story was no longer just about one woman and one judge. It became a conversation about systemic racism and how it could shape people's lives in ways they couldn't always control. The judge, despite all the attention, continued his work, using the platform he had inadvertently gained to speak out about these issues, hoping to. In the months that followed, the woman's life seemed to spiral further. The public outcry against her racist actions didn't just fade away, it lingered. Meanwhile, the judge's reputation grew stronger, not for his public reaction to the incident, but for his ability to rise above it. He wasn't interested in fame or vindication. His goal was simple: to show the world that one person, in one moment, could stand up against hate and make a lasting difference. In the end, the judge had not only wrecked lie. The incident on the plane became a turning point for many who had watched it unfold. People began to ask themselves uncomfortable questions about their own biases and prejudices. Conversations about race, justice, and equality became more frequent, and more individuals were inspired to challenge their own assumptions. For some, it was a wake-up call, a reminder that racism, in all its forms, had to be confronted. The judge's quiet strength had become a beacon of hope for those fighting against hate. For the woman, the journey was much harder. She had underestimated the consequences of her actions. She never thought that a moment of cruelty could spiral into something so much larger. Her social media pages became filled with hateful comments, her professional reputation crumbled, and she found herself isolated. No apology could undo what had been done, and she realized that her own ignorance had cost her much more than just the respect of others. It had shattered the illusion that she was able. The media continued to spotlight the judge, portraying him not just as a victim of racial prejudice, but as a symbol of dignity and integrity. Many saw him as a role model for how to navigate the complexities of racism without resorting to violence or anger. His message, however, remained simple: true strength is found in one's ability to remain calm, to rise above the chaos, and to challenge injustice with grace. His focus remained on using his voice to create systemic change, rather than using. As the months passed, the judge's advocacy work expanded. He began speaking at schools, community centers, and public forums about the importance of understanding and confronting racism. He stressed that while confronting prejudice was crucial, education and dialogue were just as vital in breaking down the barriers of misunderstanding. His talks weren't about bashing the woman, but rather about creating a future where people would feel empowered to stand up for what was right, just as he had done. The woman, on the other hand, struggled to find a place in a world that had already rejected her. She attempted to regain her footing, but the scar of her actions never fully healed. It wasn't just the public outrage that haunted her, it was the realization that she had lost something far more valuable: her own sense of humanity. The man's refusal to retaliate, his quiet strength in the face of hatred, had exposed her for who she truly was. And in doing so, he had given her a lesson that she wow. As the months went by, the public conversation about racism continued to evolve. People began to hold themselves more accountable, not just for their actions but for their silence. The judge's role in this shift became clearer. He wasn't just a bystander to the situation, he was a catalyst for change. His actions, though simple in their execution, had created a ripple effect that reached beyond the confines of that plane. He had shown that standing up for what's right, even in the most difficult. Meanwhile, the woman struggled to find peace. As she tried to rebuild her life, she faced constant reminders of her past actions. Her career faltered, and her relationships became strained. People no longer saw her as the confident, untouchable figure she once was. Instead, she was now a symbol of ignorance and hate. Despite her efforts to apologize, it became clear that true change couldn't be achieved through mere words. She would need to spend years, if not her entire life, proving that she. In contrast, the judge continued his work with even more dedication. His legal career flourished as people recognized his integrity, not just as a judge but as a person who stood by his values in all circumstances. His public advocacy for racial justice became central to his identity, and he used his platform to influence others. His story became a beacon for those who had been wronged, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is to remain calm, dignified, and steadfast in T. One day, the woman reached out to the judge, seeking a meeting. She wanted to apologize again, this time in person. She had come to realize the depth of her actions and the pain she had caused, not just to him, but to others who had witnessed her cruelty. She acknowledged the complexity of the issue, understanding that an apology wasn't enough. She knew she had to show through actions that she was committed to change. The judge agreed to meet, but he made it clear that it wouldn't be an easy conv. The meeting was difficult. The woman, now deeply humbled, sat across from the judge, unable to meet his eyes at first. She spoke of her journey towards self-reflection, of the pain she had gone through after realizing the harm she had caused. The judge listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When it was his turn to speak, he simply said, "Acknowledging your wrongs is the first step, but the real work comes in how you choose to live from here on out. It's not about seeking forgiveness, it's..." The woman left the meeting with a new understanding of the judge's perspective. She realized that seeking redemption wasn't about getting forgiveness from the people she had wronged. It was about changing her actions and outlook on life. She took his words to heart and began her journey toward self-improvement. Her first step was to dedicate herself to learning more about racism, privilege, and empathy. She joined local groups that focused on racial equality, slowly trying to undo the damage her. As time passed, the woman made genuine strides in changing her views. She became an active participant in discussions about racial justice and worked hard to become an ally for marginalized communities. While her past actions couldn't be erased, she understood that her current work was an effort to make things right. The public began to notice her efforts, and some even began to commend her for the courage it took to change. Though many would never forget her past, there were some who saw her EF. For the judge, however, his focus remained on using his experiences to make real, systemic change. He continued to speak out about racial profiling and prejudice, using his platform to advocate for policies that would address these issues head-on. His career as a judge allowed him to take practical steps in the courtroom, ensuring that those who faced racial injustice were treated fairly. Despite all the media attention, he remained grounded, understanding that the fight for justice wasn't about. As the judge's influence grew, so did his commitment to fighting for a better future. He pushed for reforms in both the legal system and society at large, working to ensure that no one would have to endure the same type of humiliation he had faced. His experience on that plane had shaped him, but it had also fueled his passion for justice. He continued to fight for fairness, knowing that even small victories could lead to larger ones in the ongoing battle against racism. Years later, the judge's actions became the cornerstone of a larger movement, one that sought to not only address racial injustices but to eradicate them entirely. The woman, too, had transformed. Her commitment to advocacy and education became a testament to the power of change, showing that even the deepest prejudices could be overcome if one was willing to look inward and do the hard work. The story of the plane incident became a symbol of hope, a reminder that no matter how deep-rooted hate as the years went by, the judge's role as an advocate for racial justice only strengthened. He began collaborating with other leaders and activists, helping to create initiatives that aimed to combat racism in the legal system and beyond. His work didn't just stop at the courtroom, it expanded into public policy and education, aiming to create lasting change for future generations. His commitment to the cause became a beacon of hope, reminding everyone that individuals could truly make a difference. The woman, now deeply embedded in advocacy work, continued her journey of self-reflection. She had become a speaker at events and a contributor to organizations that focused on racial equality and social justice. Her transformation wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but she had proven that change was possible. Her story was one of personal growth, and though it began with an ugly act of hatred, it evolved into a powerful message of redemption and the power of second chances. The judge's story, along with the woman's eventual transformation, became an example of how systemic issues could be confronted on both personal and institutional levels. It wasn't just about one person's actions on a plane, it was about challenging the roots of racial discrimination and showing that real change comes from within, through education, self-awareness, and activism. The woman's journey from prejudice to allyship proved that anyone could grow and learn, while the judge's unwavering. The story of that fateful flight had begun as a simple incident, but its impact had rippled far beyond what anyone could have imagined. It sparked a conversation that spread across communities, schools, and workplaces, forcing people to confront their own biases and prejudices. The judge's calm demeanor and steadfast resolve, paired with the woman's journey of self-discovery, became a narrative of hope and progress in the face of adversity. Their story highlighted the importance of understanding. In the end, the story of the racist encounter on the plane became more than just a moment of conflict, it became a catalyst for change. It showed that even in the most challenging situations, there is always an opportunity to learn, grow, and improve. The judge's role in this transformation was immeasurable, not because he sought glory, but because he used his position of power to make the world a better place. And the woman, despite her past mistakes, proved that redemption was possible when on. The narrative of the judge and the woman didn't just stop within the confines of their personal growth, it sparked a larger societal shift. More people began to question their own biases, confronting the subtle prejudices they had long overlooked. Schools incorporated more lessons on racial justice, and workplaces started holding sensitivity training sessions. The ripple effect of the incident spread across communities, proving that when we hold individuals accountable for their actions, it can. The judge, now widely respected for his courage, continued to use his platform to push for laws that would hold those guilty of racial profiling accountable. He advocated for better training in law enforcement, pushing for the idea that every person, regardless of race, deserved to be treated with fairness and respect. His speeches often began with the story of that flight, as it served as a reminder of the importance of confronting hatred in all its forms. For him, this wasn't just a personal. The woman, despite facing harsh criticism, continued her activism, knowing that every day was an opportunity to prove her sincerity. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles, and worked tirelessly behind the scenes to support policies aimed at creating racial equality. While many still viewed her past actions as unforgivable, her transformation became a testament to the idea that people can change. She became a living example of redemption, showing that, no matter how deep the mistake, with true. As the years went on, the judge and the woman's paths occasionally crossed at conferences and forums where racial justice was being discussed. Each time, their encounters were a reminder of the power of second chances, of growth, and of the importance of empathy in our society. What had once been an intense, public confrontation between two people was now a shared story, one that demonstrated that even the most unlikely of individuals could learn and evolve. Their mutual respect for one another Eventually, both the judge and the woman were recognized for their individual contributions to racial justice, receiving awards for their advocacy work. The woman's transformation was hailed as an example of how deeply ingrained biases could be overcome, while the judge's ongoing dedication to dismantling systems of oppression earned him accolades. The story of that plane ride became a powerful reminder of how moments of hate could evolve into movements of change, and how individuals, when they see the ripple effects of the judge and the woman's journey, reached beyond their immediate circles. Advocacy groups, inspired by their actions, began to mobilize in greater numbers, pushing for policies that addressed not only racial profiling but also broader issues of social inequality. Their story became a rallying cry, a symbol of what could happen when individuals choose to confront their personal demons and work toward a greater good. Their actions became a part of a larger narrative of collect. With time, the woman began to find peace within herself. While her past would always be a part of her, it no longer defined her. The work she had done to educate herself and contribute to social change became her new identity. She had transformed from someone whose ignorance had caused harm to someone whose voice now amplified the cries for racial justice. It was a long journey, but every step of it reinforced her belief in the power of self-reflection, learning, and true accountability. The judge, now a respected figure in the fight for justice, continued to use his platform to inspire future generations. He mentored young lawyers, helping them navigate the complexities of law with integrity and empathy. He emphasized that true justice wasn't about winning cases, it was about upholding the values of fairness and equality for all. His influence extended beyond the courtroom, as his words continued to resonate with those who sought to change the world for the better. The final chapter of their shared story was written not in one grand gesture, but in the quiet, everyday actions of the judge and the woman. Their journey of transformation wasn't just a personal one, it was a collective one. They had shown the world that even the most painful moments could lead to growth and understanding. Their story lived on, not in headlines or awards, but in the hearts of those who had been inspired by their courage to change. In the end, they had proven that the fight for